A Science of Change, podcasting by Gilmore Crosby, social scientist, author, and organization development professional since 1984. Okay, so here we go again with another podcast, and it's great to be with you, audience. Today I have very special guest, Dr. David Jamieson, who has had a long and storied career in OD. And so, hello, David.
Hello. Yeah, nice to be with you, Gil. I appreciate this.
Well, it's great to be with you.
Yeah.
And so if you could just start at the very beginning, like, where you were born, a little bit about your childhood,
Okay.
and then from there, what drew you to the field of organization development?
Yeah. I think I have a pretty clear path about how that happened. Well, I was born in Westchester, Pennsylvania, just 25 miles west of Philadelphia,
Oh,
Pennsylvania, and that's where I grew up. And
just about a 30-minute drive from my home.
oh, okay, there you go. Yeah. And it was a nice small town, about 13,000 people when I grew up. Now it's quite bigger again, but uh, but I haven't been there. My parents were there all their life, and they're in the cemetery in Westchester. And I haven't been there lately, but I used to go visit every time I was on the East Coast. But no, and so how would I describe it? This is looking back a little bit because I was never over about 5 feet 4 inches. So I was always smaller than most of the guys in the neighborhood and in school and everywhere else. And so part of my life was pushing off bullying people quite a lot. And then I decided to move into sports because if I was really working with other good people on sports, that we would get along better, and they would help to respect me a little bit and not be kicking me around as a small person. So I ended up in soccer and track, and in our high school, we were champions in track, and I got pretty good by being pretty fast. But that was good. And then the soccer, and by the time I got to my 12th grade, I had a big injury, and it was in my lower back, and I couldn't run anymore. So
Mm.
I had to stop that there, and I sort of shifted myself over as I left my high school and went to college. I went to Drexel in Philadelphia because at that point in my life, the only thing that looked interesting to me was engineering because on the summers I worked where my father worked in a manufacturing company, and I was more impressed by what the engineers were doing. So I said I would go to Drexel for engineering, and that only lasted 1 year because I watched all my math scores go down every session, and I realized that one thing I wasn't great at was math. So I had to so I went from B to C to D in three different and I said, wait a minute, I may not be picking the right career here, and I was just 18 at the time, and so so I switched over to the business school, and I also looked at all the things in psychology and sociology, which are more around the behavioral sciences. And I got a lot of courses from there, and I got a lot of courses from business. And instead of my B, C's, and D's, the last 3 years, I had all A's. So I knew that I was hitting something that was good anyway. And
Nice. And I just got to say, that's a beautiful campus, that Drexel Pitt campus. I've been there many times.
yeah, and I was there when before it was all built out, but I was in that the old building, the main building,
Sure.
and the other thing that I did is we had co-op in Drexel, so you only go to school for 6 months, and then you go get out to work in jobs for 6 months. So I on the first one I did an engineering one, and I went to a steel plant and did a lot of the work that they did that people did there to kind of collect data and improve the way they do their work. And
Where
then
was that?
that was at Lucan's in Coatesville.
Okay,
Yeah.
nice.
And then by the time I had switched over to business, I was starting to get more involved in the student affairs since I wasn't in sports anymore. I said, what else can I do? And I got involved in the student council and that kind of stuff. And I was a president for 1 year. And while I was doing that, I started to work with some of the people in the administration, and I got fairly close with the vice president of the academics and this and the dean, the student dean. And so for my next two co-ops, I had jobs at Drexel, and I stayed there and learned how universities were administering things and how they were working things. And I helped them create a whole system of students in roles that put them into all the serious committees in the university. And I sat in on a couple of them myself. And we had about 30 or 40 students after a year that were involved in each different college and were in some of the meetings they had with their deans and stuff like that. So
Lovely. So you were part of the student influence on the administration of the university.
yeah, and it was great. And of course, one of the years we were there, this is in the '60s. One of it was where everybody was every campus was having various big problems and students doing things, and we had a big group of people that came into the mid thing, and they just stayed there all day and all night. So in a way, I became a representative, going back and forth sometimes between the students that were trying to, raise all the hell they could, and the administration was trying to actually work with them. Back in the '60s, this was happening everywhere, I think, but I didn't
Yeah,
know.
actually, one of Dad's interventions early on was student influence without anarchy at Gonzaga University.
Yep, there you go. It's the same thing. And so I did that up till the end, up until I was till the end. And in my last year, one of my fraternity brothers was getting a new job that no one had ever heard of before, and he was going to be an internal OD consultant for a healthcare company.
Nice.
And so he started talking to me about it, and he was about 2 years ahead of me. And so, yeah, so he left and went to one of the Philadelphia hospital areas and told me about it. But when he told me about it, I started to research, and I started to talk to one of the sociology guys who was very, very good. And I took 2 courses from him. And I just wanted to understand the applied behavioral science side of it. And
Sure. Sociology is an important part of our field.
yeah, I think so. And so anyway, but here's what I mean. So at that point, I decided that I wanted. Here was the funny part that I never went through with is I said, I think having worked at the university, I saw all the problems of that system, and and I learned it very quickly. And I said, I would like to one day be a president of a university and be able to build a better educational organization. And and so I said, what do I have to do? And they said, number one, you need a doctorate. And of course, I was just finished with my bachelor's degree. And I said, do you think I can do it without getting a master's? And he says, I don't know. A lot of schools won't let you. So I went to four of them. I applied to four of them. Three of them told me they'd take me in the master's. And UCLA popped up and said, we will not only take you in, and all the work you've done at Drexel is also helpful. Plus your grade scores are good. We will take you in and we'll give you a full scholarship.
Wow.
So that's how I went all the way from Philadelphia out to Los Angeles and spent 4 or 5, I guess 5 years by the time I was finished at UCLA, and that changed my whole life because number one, I've already chosen now to learn more about OD and to get right to the doctorate, so I'd be available maybe someday to become a university president. But anyway, while I was there, I got opportunities to go out in the field with some of the faculty and practice things. And we had some courses where you could actually learn to do a few things. And Warren Schmidt was there then, and he was a wonderful guy. Bob Tannenbaum was there.
Okay.
Fred Masaryk was there. And these people were all connected to the founding of the thing. And so I thought I had a great, oh, Tony Rea. Tony Rea taught a lot of our OD courses, and he and Newt Margulies had the very first textbook in OD. And
Nice.
and he was and these so they were really good people. And so I did that, and while I was there I got introduced to a friend of Warren Schmidt's who was just a guy named Robert Matt Melcher, and he was a consultant. He was not an OD consultant, he was a management consultant, but I'll tell you, once I connected with him, he hired me. And so in my last year I was able to work with him part-time and finish the rest of my work. Then we found a good place to do a dissertation. So I did my dissertation through one of his clients. And what I learned from him, we stayed together for 14 years before he got very ill and then passed away soon after that. And instead of me trying to keep that company going, I decided I'd rather do the work than be an administrator. So I went on my own then. And the next 40 years, I was a full time consultant. But I,
Nice.
but
What,
I,
what, what,
yeah, but you know what was good is I learned a lot from him as a consultant. He did not understand OD, but definitely, but,
whoop.
de- but definitely it was very interesting to me, and I want to use the word luck a lot. I mean, I was lucky that I got started at the beginning rather than having three different careers and then finally finding OD. I was very lucky. I started right from that start as soon as I went to UCLA. And then from there, I started meeting all kinds of people. So when I graduated in Los Angeles, I graduated from there and I went right over to Pepperdine, who was one of the early master's programs in OD, and I was hired part time. So I was still doing consultant and I was part time working with some of them. And the thing that was phenomenal, every single founder you can think of was almost always a guest there. And so I was working with those people while they were guests. And
Like Bradford?
yeah. Well, no, I mean, yeah, just about everybody you can think of. I mean, Ed Schein, Peter Black, all the names that we had. Beckhart was always there. Bob Tannenbaum was always there. There's a bunch of people who had been coming to Pepperdine for some time, and my job was to run some of the 7-day residencies. So I would help design it, and we'd have one or two of those guests come in during that week. And so you got to know them, and you got to sit there and learn along with the students about how they were talking about things. So
Nice. And were T groups part of the residency at that point at Pepperdine?
yeah, at Pepperdine that we had a short term T group in the very beginning of every cohort. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Nice.
And so after I was there for a couple years, I was there about 16 years completely, but I always ran one of those at the beginning of every residency. So I got to do practice those as well. And but I mean, so you put all that together, and what I think it did for me is I learned the most from most of the original people, not from all the books that I read after that. And
Sure.
and I feel the same way today when the field is a little scattered and people aren't sure really what it is. I think more I think more clearly now that it's not that hard to understand what we do. And the thing that was good was I was lucky to have those people to support that part of it. And then I went right into my consulting, and I had that for about 40 years. And I said to myself, I believe more in scholar practitioners than I do in just being a practitioner. So I said, finally, I made a choice, and I said, I want to shift and see if I can get a good economic or academic job. I do not want to become an academician, and I never will be. I'm still really in my heart. I'm a practitioner. But what I did do is there was a national search going on to get somebody to become the new department chair at St. Thomas in Minnesota, and there I
Hmm.
was in California, and I didn't want to move, but the job was perfect because there was a master's and a doctorate, and it was in a school of education. So I said, okay, I'll go do it. And I had a wonderful time there. We redesigned everything. We brought in some new outside people as adjunct faculty, and we had really good mix between scholarship and practice, and built the masters and built the doctorate, and that lasted.
Well,
Yeah, so
well,
that's
so that's was one of the gaps that Lewin was trying to bridge was the scholar practitioner gap.
yeah, I know, and because I would see people who were very good scholars, and I said, "Geez, I don't know how to do that very well." And then I saw people who were very good practitioners, and I was moving in the right direction for that. But I said I need to test myself. So when I took that job, I wanted to test myself in the job, and in reinventing the two degrees, and working with a faculty and being the leaders of a faculty group. And I didn't know if I would make that or not, but that's where you use yourself. I shifted from one role to another, and I learned how to do that. And it worked very well until we had one dean who came in and made the statement that said, we don't want to do anything with OD because we really want to help people in business. And that just was the worst phrase I ever heard in my whole life. So so anyway, I was tenured, but I had nothing to stay there for and nothing to teach left, because all the courses that I created and designed were eliminated. They weren't there anymore. So
Well, that sounds painful.
it was very painful, and it was 2019. And I said, that's okay. I'll go get another job, except the pandemic wiped out the two jobs that I was going after. So for about 3.5 years, I ended up with nothing to do hardly, and I'm still figuring out what's the best use of my time in the rest of my life. So that's kind of where I am now. I'm still very solid in OD. I think there's things I think that can help us do some of the difficulty things we have to do today, but we can't keep making it feel complexity and have 8,000 definitions and 8,000 methods and 8,000 tools and all that stuff. It's really very simple. Core essence is what we have to understand, is how I'm now living my OD life. So
Well, I certainly agree with you that there's simple core essences that can be transferred even to hourly workers. Hourly workers can learn how to engage
that's right.
uh, and facilitate and have an influence on the organization that really is missing in a lot of places. So,
That's right.
uh,
That's right.
so
Yeah.
so now that program still exists. I mean, 2019 is not too long ago, and I know there's people there at St. Thomas that are still.
No, but
Uh,
that program's gone. It's
oh,
a
is it completely gone? Okay.
it's completely gone, and I left in 2019 looking for something else, and haven't really found anything good since then. But anyway, that's what I still want to figure out. What am I going to do? I don't want to retire per se, but at some point you get too old to do much. But as long as I'm okay now, I want to keep doing things that I care about. That's all. So
Sure. Well, hopefully this will help people be aware of you
yeah,
and maybe reach out to you. Uh,
yeah.
the No, you did find your way into the OD network as the primary publisher of the OD review.
Well, that's just I was on the review board since 1993, and
Okay.
I was doing all those reviews with four different editors. I only took the editor job in 2020, so that's when I
Well,
became the editor of it. Yeah,
I appreciate your presence there. I have an article coming out anytime now. Do you know when the next ODR is to be published?
next week.
Oh, good.
Yeah, it's on its way. It's on its way. Absolutely.
Lovely. Lovely, because I have something about dialogic OD and
Yeah,
Lewinian OD, and yeah,
that's
so
right.
I'm
That's right. Yeah.
excited to see that out into the public.
Yeah, and I mean, I never did anything else with ODN, but the whole time I was consulting, I was always paying them away, but I went to every conference every year because they were very good conferences because of who showed up there. And almost all the founders, one way or the other, were showing up because that's where they used to meet with each other and discuss their own stuff. Because
Sure.
the early ODN had a very solid reputation, and somewhere that's gotten lost in the last 20 or 30 years. I think it's just not doesn't attract as many people to come to their conferences and stuff. So
Well, they went away a bit from having the experienced practitioners be the ones teaching and
yeah,
in those conferences to
that's right.
more just going with the latest trend, whatever it was, like even
Yeah,
having the theme be AI or the theme be
yep,
stuff that's peripheral really to getting in and engaging the organization.
yep,
Uh,
yep, yep.
I'm hopeful that they're coming back to that now. They just changed a lot of the people in charge of the OD conferences. So,
That's what they're doing now, exactly, yeah, so they're gonna see if that'll help. I hope it does, because they only have 4 or 500 members, and with that many members, the whole organization doesn't have a voice, doesn't have big influence anywhere, because there's hardly anybody in there. When you look at doctors and lawyers, their professional groups have thousands of members, and
sure.
we've never had thousands of members, so anyway, but
Well, tell me a little bit about some of your OD projects over the years.
well, there's a couple that there's a few that always stand out for me, and I have to be. To be honest, I think as I started out, I was well. I had theories and models, and I just came out of a doctorate when I started. So yes, I knew how to do those things. But what I learned within the first year or two is I kept saying, hey, when you're actually in the field working with clients, it doesn't quite work the same way some of these models and theories describe it. So,
Sure,
so I started to figure out ways to nuance how I did things and approach things differently. And I would ask friends who had been in the field longer and stuff. I learned. I kept learning, in other words. And so over time, I started to get way better ways to be the person who helped the system learn enough that they could begin to make their own changes, so that I didn't get too caught up in I want to be the expert and help and make their change. I want to join them and guide them in the right way to do organization change. So in the beginning in the beginning, my partner and I that I was with first, I was with him for 14 years that the before he passed away. But we worked a lot with school district areas, with a lot of education areas, and we both did it because we had a belief in that education is a very important type of organization, and we should help them improve themselves. And so I worked with a lot of those people and did my dissertation on that work as well. And what was so interesting, and I still feel the same way. And at that time, they were getting money from federal monies, I think, and
sure.
they were able to get some consultants. This is probably 1970s and maybe some 1980s. And so I still today think that anything that's structured like education does have a set of issues almost automatically, and it has to do with administration, faculty, and students. Those are the three cores. And so we learned a lot of ways where we could help them improve their administration piece, how they could engage both faculty and students in the way in which they did planning and stuff. And then that started to help some of the districts do a little bit better work. And we did it at this district level, we did it at the state level, and we also did it at like the community college level on a lot of different clients. And so I really like that because we focused, because of my partner, the work that he had learned in aerospace. He had worked in aerospace. The thing he was working the most on was clarifying the tasks that people actually need to do. Number two, clarifying the roles and the different kinds of roles people have with each task. And then three, building the relationships that are necessary between people who are in the same system and may have some part of a task that they need to deal with. So he used to call it roles and responsibility. And so
Sure.
we did a lot of work like that, and it really did change a lot. I mean, it ended up really helping people to get out of each other's way and to also support each other in the different parts of what they needed to do. So that
That
was
sounds like good basic, sound OD, and very true to Lewin's heart was,
yeah,
also how people teach is what leads to, like you can teach about democracy in a way that's where you're just telling people, lecturing at them, and they have to come up with the answers,
yeah,
and instead of engaging them and thinking for themselves,
yeah,
and that fundamentally leads to people being dependent on authority figures, and it's actually anti-democratic if the students are just spitting out the answers that the
that's right.
adults are giving them.
That's right.
So he saw that as completely connected to creating sound democracy, and which requires engagement by citizens.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you know Dick Schmuck?
No, no, I don't.
Okay, he was a colleague of my father's. He
Yeah.
just passed away.
Oh boy.
Uh, yeah, but he was he applied action research in educational institutions his
Oh,
whole
good.
career.
Oh, good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, well, I want to tell you just two others because they were a little different, but I'll tell you about just two others. One's real short. That is, we actually had a couple of years where we had regular work with one of the big banks in Los Angeles, and it was called Security Pacific back then. It's now part of the Bank of America. And but what we were doing is there was a big issue they had on their recruitment, and so I ended up working with the head of their HR department, and we began to think through what they were doing and what they weren't doing. And what stood out very clearly was they rarely went internally to find people for new jobs. They went outside too often first. And so we made a whole new design where whenever a new opening would open up, there would be a whole sharing among the people in the organization so that they could potentially apply first for some of those things. Well, anyway, it not only worked well, in the first year they saved $1 million. And this is a long time ago. So for them, it was a lot of money. And it was a very simple project. We took maybe 4 months, didn't have to pay a whole bunch to us as consultants. And they got $1 million back just because they started a new first stage of how they did recruiting, and they had also kept a lot of people in their system who didn't go leave somewhere else but found a better job inside of a big bank. So
Yeah,
yeah,
retention is really important, and
no, yeah, it was great. I loved working with those people. They were really good. And then the last one I want to do is one of the last field things I did before I came to St. Thomas is I worked with the big utility out there in that covers the whole bottom half of the state of California. I mean, they have all the utilities in that area, and I worked on a lot of different projects there. And when they were trying to decide whether to merge with another big utility that could make them even bigger. The vice president in charge of that knew that I had done work on culture and knew some things, and he had seen me one time in that system where I was doing a small workshop on culture. But this is 2 years later, and he remembered it, and he got hold of me and he brought me in and he said, "Would you be interested in helping us do something we haven't done before?" And I said, "Yes, I would. What is that?" And it, and he said, "We need to understand our culture, and we also need to understand the culture of the other one. We've done everything else that people do when they're trying to merge together. We've got all the technical things and all the HR things and the salary thing, but we don't have information on the cultures." So basically, they hired me, and in one year, I spent little less than 6 months on theirs, and about a little less than 4 months on the other teams. And they were about, I don't know, they were two different cities, so they were probably 2 hours apart, maybe something like that. And so what I did is here's the big change that I made. I said, one of the things I had started to learn is, as a consultant, I was almost always hired to collect all the data and then come back with some things that people could talk about. And I said, yeah, that's kind of the way a lot of it worked. And I realized that it didn't always work that well that way. So I said, I'm going to
It was
try.
more of an expert approach,
It
if
is, I
you,
know,
yeah,
and I realize that I think a lot of OD people are on the margin of that a lot. And
yes.
so what I did, and it was one of the best years I had, and best outcomes. So I asked the leader team. I mean, the vice president invited me into the leader team meeting, and I said, I would like each of you to nominate one or two people that you think should be on my team, because I want people who cut across your system diagonally. So there's some high people and some people who are in lower roles, and I want them to be people who you believe have had good experience in this company and could help us learn what the real culture is. And sure enough, they did that. And I interviewed with each one of them, and I accepted all but one, I think, because I thought we were going to get too many eventually. And I took those people and I told them how I was going to do it. I says, I'm going to spend a half a day with these people, and I will teach them in that half a day what it is we're looking for and how we're going to organize ourselves to go across the company and all the geography they're in. And we're going to collect all these data. And we did. And I set it up in 5 categories, because I had a way of thinking of culture through 5 categories. They all went and did their work. They came back and they shared with each other. Then it took us about 2 days to make some use out of what they brought. And the way I do that, and did that for the first time actually, is I said, the way we're going to do it is we're going to write the values that we feel are operating in our system. That is what we've learned from all these people who are in different roles and working in different parts of the state. What kind of a culture are they living in? And so everybody brought their different ideas in together like that, and it was a beautiful dialogue. And it took a little while, but then I asked people from each team. I said, "Look, if one of the people from each team, that would be five. If the five of you would now take all this information that we've put up on all these walls and all these posters and stuff, and put together, I want you to make a draft of the values that are in operation." And they did that. And I said, good. By the way, it all fit on one page. And so I said, now we're going to go back to the leadership team, and you're going to make the presentation. So they picked a couple people who were going to make the presentation. We all went in, and I watched them do it. And you know what? A lot of the leaders were a little unhappy about some of the reality that they heard, and they said, "I never thought that would be in our culture." And these people spoke up and said, "No, this is exactly what we learned." And we talked to people in each of these levels and stuff. Anyway, the fascinating thing about that was the president then said, "I wished I didn't hear some of this," he said, "but I think you've told us something that's very important to us." And he even spoke to me, and he said, "I thank you, Dave, for getting the information this way, because I respect this team that you had, and so we're going to pay attention to this, and I know we're going to have to deal with it." And
So, in
so,
a sense,
yeah,
you helped structure a broader participation by the employees in
yeah,
influencing the future culture.
yeah, yeah, that's right. And then they knew I had to go to the other organization next. So they said they would pause for the time being and see what happens. So I did the same thing with the other group, and it worked a little. They're smaller, and it worked a little faster. And we did exactly the same thing there. And then we started to talk with the HR people in both organizations, just beginning to think about, if we do the merger, what will we have to do? And we started that, but we didn't go far on it, because once they got all that data together, the leaders of both of those two organizations came to the same decision, and that is, we don't think we should be merged. This is going to be way difficult, because the two sets of culture drafts were day and night different. They were really different, and I knew it was going to take years to get them to figure out a single culture. But I didn't say anything about it. But the two presidents decided to stop, and they canceled it basically, and they're still separate organizations in California. So
Interesting.
yeah, but I just think about it as the best way I used myself and the best way I used the right people in the system. That's what I think made it work.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, so here you are. You're still an
Hmm.
OD practitioner,
Yeah.
and you're wanting to put your skills into service. How would people get a hold of you?
Oh, I mean, they can. I'm on LinkedIn, and they can just get I still have my email from St. Thomas, because I'm professor emeritus from there now. So that's what I use most of the time, and so it's pretty easy to get hold of me, I think, and find me. So.
Okay, cool. And they could always reach out to me, and I could connect
Oh,
them to you also.
absolutely. Yeah, you have all that information too. Yeah. So yeah, and I mean, it's like, I mean, there's lots of different things I can still do, but I'm really seriously in a transition by asking myself, what's the best use of my time now? And the one thing that comes to my mind is, I care a lot about the next generation people. And so when I was teaching, I knew I was dealing with that group, and I haven't been teaching as much lately. But I want to get back to teaching, or I want to be coaching or mentoring people, because all I have to share could be very useful to somebody else who's going to be dealing with stuff I won't be in the field to see. So,
Sure, and you could also, with that perspective or passion, help organizations engage the next generation. There'll always be a next generation.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
that's so
and
true. Yeah, yeah, it's so true. And I don't know. I mean, I had a really good run at Pepperdine right after I was out of the doctorate. I stayed there about 16 years. When they stopped wanting to use outside people, and they thought they had enough people, internal faculty, then I moved over to American University and spent another 16 years teaching with that. And those two were two of the original early master's programs in OD. And I loved both of those. I was doing them part time because I was still consulting, but yeah, those are the places. And then I've had maybe three other universities where I've had opportunities to bring my newer work. The stuff I've done the last 10 or 15 years is all built around our use of self, and how use of self is the critical instrument that we all have. And we need to grow it, we need to develop it, and we need to be learning all the time about how whether or not we're really doing our jobs and our work in the way that we want to, in the right intentions. And there's so many things people learn when they start to dig into that I want to keep working on that a little bit more. But right now, it's just been clarified a little bit better in our writing and stuff, so people can say, what is use of self? It means it's everything we take in and everything we choose to do. It's how we behave makes a big difference. And so I think that's the one thing that's left. And I did get to teach a lot of students that in three different schools for the last 10 years at least. So
sure, cool. Well, that reminds me of the rebirth of the Leadership Institute of Seattle, which is happening right now, and
hmm hmm
we're a T group based program.
I know.
Yeah, and certainly a big intent there is that use of self, that people get clear about what they want and think and feel in the moment, and
Right.
are able to help others by being honest about their
Yeah,
own reactions and their
yeah.
own beliefs and so on.
That's so
Uh,
good. Yeah, yeah, I know, and yeah, I know. I've talked with your brother too about that because I'd like to do something in relation to your program out there because I'm so glad to see that you've reactivated it, and I've always heard good things about it. I never was involved in it in the early days, but no, and sometimes you can just add, you can put use of self together with some other stuff like T groups, and all of a sudden, I think you get a great a great set of things and integrated, and that really helps people because the best part of knowing who you are is how well you can reflect in all of your experiences and learn something from it, and that's 50%. The other 50% is you have to have people who care about you and are willing to give you trusted feedback on a regular basis, and that's the other 50%. And
right, and that's a core part of the T group process is learning
that's
how to
right.
give feedback that's not just judgments, but uh, is behavioral
Yeah,
uh,
yeah,
and how to receive it
that's
and
right.
not just get defensive.
Yeah.
Well,
Isn't it funny that feedback was always clarified a long time ago with NTL and a lot of other people? But when people talk about feedback today, half of them don't know any of those principles of how you're supposed to do good feedback. Most people.
yeah, a lot of it's just confrontational judgments,
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Yes, yes. That's
which 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 tends to just lead to defensiveness and fear and so on in organizations.
yeah, yeah.
Well, how about the future of OD? I
Mm,
mean, you're in a unique position of as the ODR
mhm,
editor of
yeah,
hearing from all kinds of people speculate on what's
yeah,
really important now.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Uh,
yeah. I mean, I've been starting doing a few presentations around what I'm now calling the core essence, and it's kind of just something that's happened while I've been more out of work in the last 4 or 5 years than before. But I think it's one thing that I still want to write about and still want to talk about. And then I'd like to get other people doing the same thing, thinking very clearly about what is needed in our future and how can we make it more simple in a way and more easy for people to understand and learn and maybe influence all these education programs who are teaching different things rather
sure.
rather than teaching the right things. So
Yeah, and I tend to think the future's embedded in really understanding the methodologies of the past,
hmm
and knowing how to get with any group and have them solve their own problems
right, right.
is sort of an essence of it, of at least
Yeah.
of Lewin's approach.
That's right. Well, I mean, and Lewin's is so valuable in so many ways, but even your father's work too was very unique, and other people weren't doing the same things he was doing, but he had a lot of success. And I think when I learned a lot from Dick Beckhart, for example,
Mhm.
he always came to Pepperdine, and I was involved in it. So I get to have meals with him, and I get to listen to him when he's in the room with the students, and what I learned from him is I thought he was one of the better consultants also because he didn't have a doctorate. He wasn't an academic. Ed Schein brought him into MIT so he could teach there. But the reality was he really was a better consultant. And when I look at some of his writing, I also have liked the simplicity of some of those models that he's used. So
Well, we still use his
yeah,
model on how to utilize conflict and how to,
yeah,
how to have people come together
yeah.
and through dialogue create something better.
That's right. That's right. And now, of course, we have the diagnostic and dialogic and whatever. And I think we've always had it in some ways, but people never named it that way. But in reality, I think the dialogic is the one that's taking the most power right now, and people are seeing the value of what occurs if you can get dialogue going in the right way.
Sure, and that really is like in my paper that is coming out, rooted in
Yep.
uh, the basics of Lewin because that was all dialogue based. Groups
Yeah. Yeah.
having dialogue about what's in the way of whatever they're trying to accomplish and coming up with their own solutions. And if they come up with their own solutions, then they are almost certain to be successful at implementing.
Right, right. Well, and I've been good friends with Bob Marshak and Jervis Bush for a long time, even before they wrote that stuff. But when I talk with Bob a lot, he said one difference between the two of them is Bush was much more focused on just dialogue. And he says, what I know from my own experience is that we often can use some pieces of diagnostic and some pieces of dialogue. And then I started thinking about how I did my work. And I think every time there was a diagnostic piece because that's what I was taught at the beginning. So I was doing it more. And then the second part of it was as soon as you had data, as soon as I had data, I did not try to do the interpretation of the data. It came back to a team or a set of leaders, and I had to then facilitate the dialogue about what are they going to do with this data. And so in some ways, I felt like I was using that a lot. But
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, in a lot of my work, I just have the workers actually do their own analysis through
exactly,
dialogue.
exactly. That's what I think I finally learned. I think I got to that too, Bill. So, and because I there was a case somebody was talking to me about a case when I was at a conference recently, and they said there was a big company that took care of killing bugs and stuff like that in communities and cities. The problem
Hmm.
the problem is everything they used was chemical. And so they were starting to, because of people having interest in watching the safety of people and stuff, started to not want to use their stuff. And the leader of that company took took some of his best people, and the whole thing was done through dialogue. And they came up with a way to keep their business going and do the same things, but do it with things that are completely safe with no chemicals in it.
Nice.
Yeah, and I thought, wow, that's what we need. That's the kind of thing that should happen. And that wasn't having one of the big management consulting people or anything else making that happen. He did that internally with the company.
Well, that's great because there's a lot of expertise in every company in the people that are actually doing the work.
That's right. That's
It
right.
gets overlooked by most experts and by most
That's right.
top management people.
I know. I know. And when I consult, the other thing I've been worried about too is I think we have to pay more attention to leadership now than we probably have, because the books on leadership will tell you there's 25 different kinds of styles and all that, and they each have their own theories. But the more I think about what's happening today and what challenges leaders are facing, I think there's only three or four of those that make any sense anymore. And they're the things like the transformative one, and the one for where you're just trying to help people do their work as the leader. You're helping them do their work and things like that. Because that's exactly what people have complained about for many, many years in terms of what they didn't like about what their leaders were doing. And
Sure.
and I think nowadays in the 21st century and the next 5 years, the last leaders that I actually met with, a team of them, they were saying the challenges were the whole workforce is way different than when they started. The whole workforce is so differently diverse, and they're not so sure how to lead all those people. And the other one was there's so many changes happening one after another and overlapping, and somehow we as the leader seem to be the ones held accountable for how we're going to get this change done. And I said to them, I said, yeah, but that's not really fair because most of you haven't learned about change. So that's why we need partnership relationships with somebody who knows the change and somebody who knows the business. And that's exactly the best way to do it. And so, I mean, when I left those people, there's a chance that I'm going to get to do some training for them later, but it hasn't happened yet because people aren't spending money anymore. But I love talking to those leaders because they were telling me exactly what they felt challenged by. So,
Well,
well,
that
that
brings to mind for me the Lewin's approach to leadership, which was that you have to allow as much influence as possible from the people that are following you,
Right.
and still create structure, still create clarity about direction and so on. But you got to combine the two. You got to figure out how to combine as much freedom as possible in the
Yeah. Yeah.
organization,
Yeah.
and with as much with clarity about who decides what, and back to roles, like you said
Yeah.
earlier.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. No, that's really good to hear that. And isn't it amazing, however, that Lewin passed in the same year I was born, and yet his work is still really appropriate and important to us today. And I think that just amazes me because I haven't seen hardly any other theories or thinking that carries through that many decades. But yeah, I mean, it's
Yeah, it is amazing, and it's just at the same time little known by even many of the people in the OD
yeah,
profession.
yeah.
Uh, but it's simple. A lot of the stuff's simple.
I think
You
so
know.
too. I think so too. Common sense is what I sometimes think when we get too caught up in methods or five-step things and stuff like that. We're following something that somebody else says we should do. And a lot of the new people, in fact, the younger people that I worked with sometimes, the biggest difference was they didn't have the wisdom yet to be able to modify and customize even though they may do those kind of steps, but they don't follow it in a rigid way. And I think that is what we needed to do. And when I was learning from founders, think they were always saying that. He says, every system I go into, there's going to be something that's a little different and I'll modify something. And that's what they did. So
Sure.
I don't know. It seems good to me nowadays, but I wished I learned it 40 years ago, so I could have done even more projects when that would have worked even better. So
Well, it's not too late, to
that's right.
just figure out how to help the organization allow their own people to influence the direction they're going.
Yeah.
Uh, is sort of the simple essence of it.
Yep. Yep. That's good. That's good. Well, and you and your brother and your father have all done a lot too, I think. And since I've met all of you and listened to it, I mean, I'm really happy to know it because I didn't know about your father earlier on, and I think it's great to see that happening too. And one day we need to. This is why people who are not learning anything about the history. There's a lot of master's programs now that I think does not teach foundations and does not teach history anymore. And I think that's sad because that misses some of the stuff that's necessary. So
Sure, it's taught more like a history lesson than as a
yeah,
exploration of the actual methods
right.
yeah. Well, is there anything else you'd like to cover? This is lovely, and I appreciate your time. Is
Yeah, me too.
anything else? Anything
Well,
else you want to get into?
no, no, I am gonna, for one thing, I am gonna start moving towards how I want to describe the future of OD. And I think maybe even trying to get more and more people to write some things about that because we could still use the review as a place to get that stuff together. And then that's one piece. And then the other piece, but what I'm not going to try to do is change the new definition or do another thing to help the whole field of OD because I don't think the whole field is connected anyway. I think there's thousands of people who say they're doing OD and they're not in the same organizations or anything. But so that's one thing. And then I'll find a way to help as many people as I can, and then hopefully get a few years of relaxing and everything else, and not just run right up to the end and then boom go away. So, but that's what I think I'll do, and my teaching has been very good and evaluated very well, and I think. Because I haven't taught lately, I'm looking for one or two new ones, and I think there's a couple of people who are going to find a job for me in the teaching world a little bit, and that's worth it because it doesn't take a lot of your time. It's really fun to do, and so I hope to do those things as well. And I think that'll be the best way for me to end a career.
Okay, cool. Well, hopefully your connection with Chris and Leo's will be part of that.
I hope so too. Yeah, yeah. I like your brother a lot too. Just like, and you, both of you write a lot of good stuff too. So,
Okay, well, I think that is a wrap.
yeah,
And thank you for listening, audience. And I really appreciate your time, David.
yeah.
And so I'm going to bring this to a close.
Well, thank you very much, Gil, for the invitation. Appreciate it.
Hey, the pleasure's all mine.
Yeah,
Hey, I appreciate you listening. This, again, is Gil Crosby. And I want you to take advantage of what's available to you. I have many free materials. I am happy to talk to people about their situations, especially if you're trying to create change, either social change or organization change. We have frequent workshops that are available, T group workshops. If you have never been in a T group with us, then don't miss it in your life. It's many people have said to me, of all the trainings I've ever received, I got this one 30 years ago, and it's the only one that stuck with me. You're learning from your actual interactions with the other participants and with the faculty. The faculty are walking the same talk that they're teaching of behavioral skills. It's a training workshop. That's what the T stands for. This is done in the spirit of the creation of T groups by Kurt Lewin and his associates. It's for groups. It's for teams. That's how it was originally designed. It is a opportunity to learn about theory and put it directly into practice. Again, the original design, you learn things and then you put them into practice. It was not just all ambiguity, which is how some T groups, most are led today, where the faculty hardly says anything. That's not how this is designed. So join us for that. There's always workshops. There's the Leadership Institute of Seattle, which has certificate programs, a two-year program where you will learn from T groups and learn how to do all the organization development work that my father designed, most of it, and I continue that practice alongside my brother Chris and many other associates. So don't be a stranger. There's a lot going on. It's always changing. So be in touch, and it's on the website, crosbyod.com. I look forward to working with you in your organization or as you pursue things like reducing gun violence and decreasing racism in our society. Whatever your goals are, the social science of Kurt Lewin guides how to achieve those goals in a reliable way. And so that's what I apply and practice every day. And I invite you to do the same. Together, we can create high productivity and morale in organizations. We can create stronger foundations for democracy. We can create a better world.